أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفخه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. So inshallah we'll go ahead and continue our session, and I'm thinking that today is going to be the last one for this particular step that we've been focusing on, and inshallah after that we'll start the next step. So today just going to finish up a few more examples and we'll go from there inshallah. So with that, some check-ins. How has your week been? What are some experiences that you've been able to reframe positively? And what are some tips you have for us to benefit from, or some things that you would like for us to discuss inshallah moving forward? Okay, so the step that we were working on is the current status and inventory step, trying to figure out where we stand, what we have going on, also looking a little bit into where how we got to where we got to today. So just kind of assessing the entire aspect of what today looks like and how we got here and why we got here and some of those things. So we can also go into the next step thereafter to see how we're gonna put a strategic plan that would be that would take into consideration our previous steps that we've taken that worked or didn't work, previous experiences in terms of how we navigated, how we felt things, and so on, and what were some things that we were able to sustain and not able to sustain. And accounting for all of these things can help us in terms of making sure that we're not making the same mistakes over and over again, or and make sure that we can actually utilize some of the things that have worked in the past in moving forward from today until whatever it is that when the vision is realized. Okay, so let's cut straight to it, inshallah. And last time, or last few times, we've been talking about some of these examples. We mentioned specific stories, and we discussed some of the ways that people we had to assess themselves, and when they were assessing, they started realizing where they got, they realized why they got to where they got to, right? And they also realized where they were standing currently. They started accepting the reality that this is where I am right now and stuff. And these are some of the things that have led me to this point. And these are some things that I would like to be, but these are some places or these states of being where I'd like to be in the future. And this is what reality looks like, and this is what not realistic. This is what's not. This is so in some cases, some things are realistic and some things are not. So accepting what is realistic and adjusting yourself according to that. If something that you were looking at or something that you were basing as your principles was founded on something that was not realistic. So if you felt that you should be in the MBA, for example, and that didn't happen, or that wasn't seeming like it's going to happen, then understanding that not everyone gets in the MBA, for example, and there are certain things that are beneficial for a person to do that might be for a given person to do that might be different for another person. So some people, it might be better for them to pursue some things and for other people to pursue other things. And what that means is they're more fit for that, or if their mindsets and their dislikes and likes and stuff are more aligned with those kinds of things, that they are what we're saying more or better for, right? That they are better fits for. So for example, if a person really enjoys doing certain things, then it may be that the kinds of activities or the kinds of work or the kinds of visions that would align with that kind of mindset, or the kinds of likes and dislikes that person had, would be a little bit more in line with where they should go. But if there are certain things that whether the process or the end result is not necessarily aligned with what they would feel content with or satisfied with, then maybe those are things that might need to be reconsidered, essentially, right? So these are some things that we're talking about over here. So with that, we mentioned I tried to include as many different types of things that I could think of, or that I had experience with, and I wanted to make sure that it's something that many people can resonate with, essentially, or that would resonate with many people. So on this, I mentioned relationship dynamics. I mentioned For example, the processes that various groups of people go through sometimes. We also mentioned institutions and organizations, so it's not just human beings we're talking about in the sense of individual one person or like, small dynamics, but we're also talking about larger groups and stuff, right? Like, for example, governments and agencies and people that are overseeing other small groups of people and stuff, right? Or smaller groups, meaning the constituents relative to like a bigger group of people. So for example, individual communities that are all together, multiple communities come together under an umbrella organization, then in that case, we want to make sure that we are addressing the organization level, but we're also connecting to the individual smaller levels on the ground, for example, or other places, whatever the context might be. So with that, we mentioned a little bit about stocks. We talked about the stock market, how that works. We talked about various opportunities of da'wah, service. We talked about a little bit of business. We talked about relationship resolution in terms of the passing opportunities, the opportunity cost of sort of foregoing some things where you could have addressed them initially, for example, and kind of evaluating yourself as you go forward, and seeing and trying to optimize the time when you can jump into particular resolutions, for example, or particular opportunities, and try not to delay that too long when there is no need for that, and when the benefit is decreasing as you wait and so right, the net benefit at the end of the day. Okay, so with that, let me give an example of, we mentioned, for example, Islamic education. We talked about da'wah opportunities and stuff. We talked about how sometimes people sort of focus on certain other things, and as time passes, they start realizing how much time they've missed spending, that they would have spent on deen or da'wah stuff. So then they sort of don't get back into it because they feel like it's too late and stuff, right? But it's not. And when it comes to health and fitness, for example, you could be a 50-year-old or you could be a 90-year-old, and it's never too late, essentially, for you to try to live a healthy life, as in try to do some activities that are physical activities that can help you in terms of your physical health, but also in terms of nutrition and diet and so on, and optimizing that to make sure that you're doing whatever is best for you. So it's never really that too late, because you can always work on yourself whenever you can, inshallah. And the same thing happens with, in terms of getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Just because a person didn't spend, much time getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala throughout their life, it doesn't mean they can never actually make that decision and go. They should make that decision as soon as possible. But if they don't do it instead, it's not going to be late, because, unless you're dying and, something is like, like you're just pretending or whatever and stuff, and there's those exceptions, but ultimately there's nothing like that, where even if you're dying, for example, and if somebody reminds you to make shahada and you say the shahada and stuff and you really submit in your heart, then that's not too late, right? That's perfect. So one of the things that I was trying to hint towards is that the Prophet had conveyed to us that if a person, for example, one of the major signs of the day that the sun comes up from the west, for example, if these major signs start coming up, and then a person's like, okay, you know what, I want to become Muslim now, right? But then it's going to be too late, because the day that has already arrived and stuff, right? Essentially, so you want to make sure that it doesn't happen like that. You want to make sure that you make the most of it, and at the end of, or near the end of, so there's what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also mentions, that don't despair the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَى أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. So these people, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing his ibad. It's like a very personal, very first person sort of tone, that, oh, my slaves, right, my ibad, who have transgressed against themselves, meaning they have done a lot against it. They have been, israf is like extravagance, right? But it's like, going above and beyond, overboard, essentially, right? Against themselves. Ala anfusihim. Ala in here means against themselves, right? Anfusihim, against themselves. La taqnatu min rahmatillah. Don't despair the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now the story over here goes that there was Umar radiallahu anh, and he and two other people had made a pact that they're going to meet up at a certain time at a certain location, and they're going to migrate from Mecca to Medina, essentially. And that was their plan. They're going to make hijrah from Mecca to Medina. They're going to leave everything behind, essentially, right? And they had made a plan that they're not going to wait for anybody. If the person and the other two people are not there, then whoever is actually there, they're going to go on. So the pact was, we're going to meet up at this time in this place. Whoever among us comes, then that person or those people are going to end up leaving. And they're not going to wait or go back and check for the other person and stuff. So this was the agreement. This was the idea that they were doing. So the day came, and one of them didn't show up. Two of them came, and one of them was Umar radiallahu who came, right? So they came, and they were going to leave now. And as they're leaving, as they're going out towards, they're making the hijrah and so on, the relatives of the other person, meaning the one who was not Muhammad radiallahu, right, the second person here. So the relatives showed up, like some cousins or extended family, and they showed up. Now they came and they tried to convince him to return back. They said, your mom has made a vow that she's not going to leave the sun, and she's not going to eat and stuff like that, or she's not going to like comb her hair, essentially, right? She's not going to leave the sun, and she's not going to comb her hair. And so Umar sort of saw through the plan, and he said that, look, if your mom gets really hot, she's going to go inside. And when the sun comes up and stuff like that, it's going to get really hot and she's going to go inside. And whenever, if she doesn't comb her hair for a very, very, very long time and stuff, then it's going to start itching her and stuff. And, it might get lice or whatever it might be in her head or whatever. And she's going to be forced eventually to clean her hair, right? And to comb it and all that. And so Umar demands, don't go because this is a trap. And even if it's what they're saying is true, right? Then, that your mom is going to address her needs and stuff whenever that need comes in and stuff, but she's not going to kill herself. And that's that. So Umar advised him like that, but this person had a soft spot, and so he said, you know what, let me just go and stuff like that, right? Umar he figured that if this person leaves Islam, then that's going to be terrible. So he was advising him not to do that. Now again, I'm mentioning a story, and whoever's listening, I don't want you necessarily to start taking your own lessons out of this story and trying to apply it in your different contexts and stuff like that. You should definitely consult somebody who knows the story and has understanding of the story and understands the lessons to be derived from this story, and discuss your specific case with them, and then see if this story is applicable to whatever it is that you're trying to do in your context, or whatever your context looks like. Because if it's not, then I don't want you to use this story for that. And I make this point over here because a lot of times we hear stories, and we hear stories of the Prophet ﷺ, or we hear stories of the Sahaba, or we hear stories about the scholars and so on, or we hear advice from from people and so on, or we read the Quran, for example, or read Hadith, for example, but we don't actually verify all the time if our situations are relevant or not relevant, are the same or similar to these cases, and yet we extract some lessons that we sort of took for ourselves, and we manually insert it in our own context and stuff, and we start applying those in our affairs. Now, what that leads to is that oftentimes, because we don't understand, the rest of the Islam, right? There's so much in Islam, and we have just a tiny little portion of it because of this one piece of one story, or this one lesson, or this one ayah or hadith, that we might miss out on the bigger picture, right? So this ayah or this hadith or this story or whatever may be in a very particular context, and it might be something referring to a very specific situation. So we can't necessarily just apply that across the board and say that this is a blanket understanding and that's it, right? We have to be very contextual on this. There are some general lessons that we can take from this story. For example, that we need to be very careful. Sometimes people are going to try to play tricks on us, or they're going to try to make us, they're going to try to emotionally blackmail us to try to make us leave our religion and stuff. But that is one thing that we cannot do, even for our parents. Even if our parents urge us to become non-Muslims, we can't, actually become non-Muslims, right? Because this is where we disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then. And the rule is, the Prophet ﷺ said that there is no obedience in the case of disobedience. So even if you have people that are appointed over you by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but if those people tell you to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then that means that you don't disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because these people who have been given this authority are not given authority to have people disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the authority ultimately comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if Allah is telling you to obey this person, then if that person tells you not to listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if you follow that rule, you would by default have to also not listen to this person, because then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one who told you to listen to this person. So if they're telling you not to listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then they're telling you also by default to not listen to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, period. Meaning you don't need to listen to them in terms of their authority over you, because they're telling you to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I hope that makes sense. Anyways, so this is where things go wrong, right? And when it comes to leaving Islam, you're not allowed to leave Islam. You're not allowed to commit shirk, right? You're not allowed to do kufr and shirk when it comes to people that are telling you to do bad, or you're not allowed to harm people and stuff, hurt people and stuff without like, you know, a justified cause. And justified cause again needs to be referenced back to deen, and you know, you need to consult people and so on. So there's an entire process in all of these situations. It's not as simple as I read this ayah and this ayah, you know, it seems to match with whatever it is that my context is, and that I should apply it perfectly and stuff. So this is definitely in the context of step 2, because you're assessing, you know, what it is your situation looks like, and trying to see if that new information that you got is actually relevant to your context in the way that you're thinking, right? Number one, if it's relevant, but number two, if it is relevant, then is it in the way that you are thinking it's supposed to be relevant, right? So are the lessons that you're extracting, are they the right lessons to be extracted, and so on. So this is why having consultation with, you know, people that are well versed in this is very important. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that 2 times in the Quran. Actually, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala advises multiple times in the Quran to refer back to people in the Quran, and the Prophet encourages this multiple times, and the scholars have mentioned this, that whenever it is that we don't know something, we're supposed to go and seek counsel. We're supposed to go to people who know this information. We're not supposed to just do things by ourselves, thinking that this is what Islam is all about and that's the end of it, right? We need to actually have some verification, and you know, we need to stand on evidence and stuff. We need to fact check information and so on. So this is the Islamic framework. Anyways, going back to the story now, Umar at that time, he made this, he gave him the advice, and he said, no, this is a trick, and don't go there. Anyways, so the person felt soft-hearted, but you know, and he decided to go and become, you know, like go with these people, and just to see his mom at least. And he didn't want to give up his religion, obviously, but he said, let me just go back home, and maybe my mom is going to go back inside, and she's going to comb her hair and so on, and things are going to be better. She will take care of herself, and she's not going to be in this situation. So he had a soft spot, and he you know, went along with it. And Umar then said, here's my horse, or here's my, you know, ride, whatever animal it was, and go ahead and take it. It's fast, and inshallah, anytime that you feel like any kind of, you know, situation happening, or anytime you feel sort of like suspicious, you can always turn around and come back. And it's a fast animal, so it's going to be easy for you to escape whatever, you know, that you see that's suspicious or unnerving sort of, or something that makes you feel afraid or something like that, right? So anyways, they went on for some time. So Umar goes towards Mecca, Medina, and this other Sahabi, he starts going backwards, right? And he goes back to Mecca and stuff, right? So on the other hand, now this person is going back. Now these people are smart, so they try to say, you know what, can you just like, you know, we want to test this, we want to see this animal and stuff and everything like that. So they're like, you know, can we ride this animal or whatever? They try to like try to trick him a little bit. So he's being tricked a little bit, and he gets the animal to sit down. And when he gets the animal to sit down, they all, you know, surround him, and they jump him, they tie him up, and they take him back. Now eventually this person ends up giving up deen, and he's like, okay, fine, you know, I'm not going to be, you know, Muslim anymore. So Umar actually the Sahaba at this time used to feel that anyone who gives up religion, Islam, after they had become Muslim, then this person is never going to be forgiven by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this verse right here comes down, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ يَا عِبَادِيَ الَّذِينَ أَسْرَفُوا عَلَىٰ أَنفُسِهِمْ لَا تَقْنَطُوا مِنْ رَحْمَةِ اللَّهِ. And then the ayah continues, and then there's other ayat after it that tell you to return back. وَأَنِيبُوا إِلَىٰ رَبِّكُمْ. So there's like, you know, وَاتَّبِعُوا أَحْسَنَ مَا أُنزِلَ إِلَيْكُمْ. Turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to follow what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent, or the best of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sent, and so on. So there's like this like, you know, stuff that's revealed. So Umar, as soon as he gets this, because he was very concerned for people, he decides that he wants to send this ayah, or this context, he wants to send it to this person that had eventually given up his deen. He was left behind, or like he had gone back, and he had given up his religion, right? So Umar sends it back to him. Now this guy says that, you know, I used to go around to the outskirts, and I would just try to figure out what was the purpose of Umar sending me this ayah. Why did he send me this? Why did he send me these, like, you know, this message? Why did he send me this? And he would just, you know, just reflect, and he would try to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, remember that Quraysh actually believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the thing that made them like non-Muslims is that they didn't follow the commandments of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted them to, right? They associated others, or they set up intermediaries with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would go to, and this is the beginning of Sufism, you'll find this, that they would go to these these statues or these idols or whatever and stuff, right? And their objective was that because these things are essentially purer than themselves, because these things didn't commit sins, right? And these human beings had committed sins, so they felt like they were not really as good enough to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that they would have to go to these righteous, or not righteous, but like non-sinful people or even righteous people to try to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? Instead of connecting directly. So their objective was that we just want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through these people. Maybe they're going to put in a good word for us and stuff like that. And so this was the venue that they would take. So they actually believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And one of the proofs is that the grandfather of the Prophet Abdul Muttalib, right? He when he was approaching Abraha, the guy who came from Yemen area to come and destroy the Kaaba with his elephants, as you'll see in Surah Al-Fil. So when he met with him, he told him that he's there only for the camels that had been taken by the people of Abraha, right? But he didn't actually want to. He wasn't the one who was gonna account for the elephants that were going to try to destroy the Kaaba. And he said pretty much that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one, the Lord of the Kaaba, is going to protect the Kaaba. As for me, I am the Lord of these. The Lord meaning like the overseer and like the one who's taking care of these camels. And so that's it. I'm just here for the camels. So initially, Abraha, for example, in this case, he had this perception of Abdul Muttalib. He was very mesmerized by his appearance and his his mannerisms and the way he carried himself and so on. It just it just mesmerized him, right? But then when Abdul Muttalib mentions this, and he says that I'm just here for the camels, I'm not here to do anything about the Kaaba because Allah's going to take care of it, right? And so Abraha sort of felt a little bit offended. He's like, I'm here to destroy the Kaaba, and you're just here for your camels. He sort of felt like I guess let down a little bit, right? In any case, the people, the Quraysh in that time and afterwards, they actually believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And these are among the proofs, and there's a lot, if you study the seerah of the Prophet before the Prophet born, and in the early phases of the Prophet's life, you'll see that the people actually believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and yet they were not considered Muslims. And so the important note over here is that a person needs to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and submit to him in terms of how to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. So these are important things there. Anyways, so this person, Umar had sent the letter, the message to. He kept on going back and forth, and he believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so he tried to connect with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on. But he was a mushrik at that time. So eventually, one day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala opened his mind because he had sincerity. So the key over here is that if a person is sincere, then Allah is going to give him guidance. But no matter how good a person might seem on the outside, if there's insincerity with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at the end of the day, even if that person is very sincere to people and so on, but he's insincere with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't want to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then no matter how much evidence we present them, no matter how much guidance we give them, no matter what we do for them, no matter what kind of proofs we establish in front of them, they will not be guided. Right? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not going to guide a person who doesn't want to be guided. Right? Even if they make it seem on the outside that they want to be, they're trying to be good and all that stuff, right? But unless you connect that sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not His creation only, unless you realign yourself with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then until then, you're not going to get that guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to give you that guidance. He's already set up the entire world, and the entire world has more than enough resources to go around and then some, right? And so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has definitely done His part and more, and He continues to actively intervene in our lives and stuff in a good way to help us, look out for us and protect us and so on. So it's not just that He laid out something and that's the end, but He also is actively involved in our affairs. When you make dua, He responds. He has everything sort of taken care of, but He's also actively involved in stuff, right? And He holds Himself accountable to that, right? And He is very merciful, and His mercy precedes or overcomes His wrath and anger and stuff. Is all about. And so, in this context, going back to the story of this person, because he was sincere, and because he still believed in Allah, obviously. So when he was continuously trying and showing that he wants this guidance, or he wants to understand what's happening and what's the best course of route, or what's the best course of whatever the best option is in terms of getting closer to Allah, because he showed this to Allah, and Allah knew his heart and his sincerity, then Allah opened his mind to it, and he realized, oh, this ayah is saying that no, a person who leaves Islam can be forgiven if he decides to come back. So this was the idea behind it. So he kept on trying to evaluate, think through it, and stuff. Okay, I want to get closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That was his end goal, his objective. And he knew that there should be a way possible for it. That's like the realistic aspect, right? And he also wanted to analyze where he was. And he was trying to assess what he was given. For example, in this case, the ayah that he was given, and he was trying to understand the meaning of it and trying to connect to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him that. And so from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perspective, Allah knew what's in his heart, what's going to happen in the future, but this is just showing from the person's perspective himself. So, anyways, so this was the story where we understood that this person, because he was sincere and he was trying his best, and he had an intended end goal, which is to please Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and he was trying to take steps towards it sincerely. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him the guidance as a result of that. He made him realize what this ayah was about. And as a result, he became Muslim again, and he left and he came to Medina. I believe he came to Medina, and he stayed there for some time. So that was the story of taking, don't let an opportunity pass. Accept that you take it if it's good for you and it's better, and that's a net benefit is greater than the harm that would be there otherwise and stuff. Right? Okay, now. I wanted to make a quick note about the legal maxim in Islam. In Islamic jurisprudence, there is this maxim that in a case where there is a benefit, right? There's a benefit that you can get from something, and there's a harm that you can get. You're that is impending pretty much, or it's about to come. It's pending, or it's about to come, sort of, right? So what happens is, in this case, your priority should be to remove the harm before you focus on bringing in the benefit. Okay? So in this case, keep that in mind, that the rule is whenever there's a situation where you can either focus on averting a harm or bringing a benefit, your priority should be, all things considered, meaning you want to make sure that the amount of harm versus the amount of benefit and so on, right? Or that the nature of the harm, if it's very minimal, or if it's something that's ongoing, or it's pervasive, or if it's something a very small contextual thing or whatever in a very small situation. All these things considered, right? Generally speaking, the rule is that preventing the harm takes precedence over bringing good. Okay, so that's just a note that I wanted to mention because it related to this story as well. And if any time you guys don't understand the connections I'm making, because sometimes I might kind of go through them a little bit quickly, then just connect with us, inshallah. You can connect to you can send us an email, and we'll send you the link, inshallah. That you can connect with us, ask questions, and so on. And you can also personally connect with me, inshallah. Now, two more things really quick before we finish. And one of them is the example of masajid. So many of the masajid, for example, and this is something that you can see also in other organizations as well, they have this restructuring done at the organization level, as in the leaders, for example, or the boards and stuff get restructured. And one of the ideas is if they have a very particular end goal, and they realize that their current structure does not match, or it does not help us effectively and efficiently get to the end goal, then they're gonna see if they need to adjust their process a little bit, adjust their dynamic and structure and so on a little bit. So in this case, if they have a restructuring, it's because of the assessments that they've been doing. Okay, this structure isn't working. They're evaluating themselves constantly if it's helping them move towards the end goal, or if it's not helping them move, or if it's maybe a little bit slower than another potential structure would be, right? So in this case, this is what they're trying to do. So in this case, you'll see that there are many organizations, especially after COVID-19, for example, or in the context of COVID-19, they started seeing a need to restructure some of the things and to sort of shut down some programs, for example, or to customize them to a different venue. So the youth programming and general services and other stuff has been impacted as a result. You'll see that as the imams have focused online, that they're trying to present the same content, but in the venue, or the way that they're doing it is online. Obviously, there's challenges associated with that, and there are differences between the in-person setting and the online setting. And so the imams have to therefore customize to the online experience, and that would be a little bit different than the regular in-person stuff they would have had done otherwise. So some things to keep in mind on this, that these are some things that you're going to see constantly around you, and sometimes when that happens, instead of feeling sort of overwhelmed, one thing that we can sort of reframe it, rethink about it as is telling ourselves that, okay, there's some benefit potentially associated with it, or at least trying to first figure out why this happened, right? Trying to figure out what was the flow, the process flow, going from step one, the vision, okay, the structure that was initially put in place, the new structure and stuff, the evaluation that was done for the original structure, and what was the justification to come up with a new one, and then go from there. If it aligns better with the ultimate goal, and if the ultimate goal is a good one, and it's something that is realistic, for example, practical, it aligns with, in this case with the SEM, for example, the way the objectives are of the SEM, then in that case, then the person will feel a little bit more settled and say, okay, yes, okay, this is going to streamline the process of, whatever work that needs to be done. This is going to make things a lot better. It's going to remove some of the otherwise inadvertently put obstacles that might have been blocking the path towards effective flow. And then pretty much if that's the case, then you just go along with it. But if you're just gonna get hit by news like this, okay, something's happening, it's gonna be different and stuff, it can be very scary because you don't know what to expect. You sort of got into the flow of how things were, and the restructuring can throw you off guard. So a lot of people are also feeling this right now when it comes to youth programming, or when it comes to educational services that the other organizations are providing. They're feeling that, so you might not see that a lot of people are able to attend online, or they are sort of wanting to get things back to the way they were. But in reality, the things have the things that have the context that we're living in has impacted all of this so much that there are certain things that needed to be done, and to do things in a safe manner, right? And so accounting for that can help us sort of become comfortable with the alternatives that are being proposed into the plan. One more thing on this point, is that there was an article I was reading today earlier, and it was talking about how there is this people have this expectation that they're hoping that things are going to go back to the way that they were before COVID-19, but the reality is, because of pretty much so much in the world that has changed, because COVID-19 forced essentially for people to have to pursue things in a different way than before, right? The new infrastructure that the world has started to implement over the past several months, right? And it's, if you think back about it, February, was in the beginning of the year, and we're in October at the end of the year. So how much time has passed, essentially, right? And because of this, and because the people needed to continue doing things and stuff like that to make their ends meet, essentially, or to continue getting the services that they needed and stuff, so that things needed to continue onwards, but they had to adapt to the context. Now those adaptations are sort of permanent now, right? And that means that they've sort of settled down a little bit, and they seem to be what's going to happen in the future. So working from home, for example, online classes, for example, a lot of these things that what was something sort of strange before, now it's going to be more of a recurring thing. They were also talking about getting visiting your doctor sort of from home, like telemedicine, essentially, right? That's another big thing that's seeming to be in the future, in the near future, because this was something that was utilized a lot, and it's being utilized currently. So a lot of these things, just keep that in mind, that these are some things that are coming up. So when you have these expectations, you sort of get used to them, you accept them, and you can then customize yourself like that. Now there is another thing that people had been mentioning in the past, in maybe a few years back, but now it's with COVID-19, it's a lot more likely, and it's a lot more likely to happen quickly, quicker than what it was projected before, and that is freelancing, or people doing various gigs and stuff. The gig industry is becoming a little bit more, it's picking up a lot more, especially with all these things that happen, and a lot of different things that people had to do to make ends meet. So now it seems that that's going to be a bigger thing and stuff like that. So just saying these things so you can have an expectation in terms of where the world is seeming to move in the next few months and years, and so you can kind of align yourselves mentally. But also, if you wanted to, you can also look in, if you're interested in stocks, because that's one of the things I had mentioned, and those are some things that you can actually focus on, but also you can focus on some of the things that you need to account for when it comes to planning for your kids. If you're raising kids, for example, if you're working with kids, some of the things that you should sort of have in your head, and this is what you're going to have to face in terms of some of the challenges that are going to be coming associated with these new things, the new structuring that's happening in seven. So just be mindful of that. Be ready. Don't be surprised when the time comes and you didn't prepare. So I'm just giving you some tips to kind of keep ahead of the game, essentially, and to start pretty much optimizing the interactions that you might have and stuff like that, and addressing these issues with each other. And the last thing is the mental health and psychological health services. Now, the first course that was set up, so I think in the mid 1900s, maybe in the 50s or 60s, something like that, they had this concept of psychological first aid. Right? It was a concept, but around a little bit after 9/11 happened, people actually set up courses to address psychological first aid. Now, psychological first aid is connected also to or heavily connected to the state of being a person is in when in the context of natural disasters or emergencies or big changes in their lives and stuff, right? So in this case, for example, after 9/11, these courses became to become trained in how to address these situations and stuff became something that they actually set up. Right before that, there wasn't actually an official course to help people be trained in them so that they can help address the needs of people in the context of disasters and stuff. So if you are a person who is on the ground in relief agencies, for example, or disaster situations and stuff, having this sort of course can be very, very useful. And I put a link over here, or some of the discussions that have been some of the research or some of the some of the discussion that has been sort of consolidated in this article that you might find useful. So just something to keep in mind. Mental health first aid is also another thing. It also helps in terms of people going through difficulties in life, stressors in life and stuff, and so on. And this can also help you in terms of identifying potentially some people that might be at risk. Some people that might be at risk in terms of let's maybe like they're at risk for committing suicide, or they have suicide ideation, for example. They have these ideas in their minds and stuff like that. So being able to pick that out quickly, and these kinds of things happen also. The mental health first aid courses to the institute that's offering that now. A lot of this also progressed in the aftermath of the shootings that took place in many places in the world, right? So they set up these things because of the impact that the students and parents and community members and stuff that had when they saw these things, or when they were living these moments and stuff like that, because of the experiences they had, or they found out about because of other people that were impacted and stuff, right? So these are some things that were useful in others, and these are some things that you can also find useful. Now, one thing to note about psychological first aid, this is, for example, if a person went through they witnessed a mass shooting, for example. For example, we remember when the New Zealand shooting happened in Saturday. So in that context, they actually found in the research that the people that were helped with this psychological first aid situation, or the techniques that are used for psychological first aid, right? They found that this was more effective and more beneficial than going with the traditional mental health services of seeing a psychiatrist, for example, and going through those things. The first response had a very positive impact, and so when they realized that, they started focusing on training people to be competent in this kind of first aid. So the first response that you have, the kinds of strategies that they use over there are going to be different than the kinds of strategies that you're going to see in the context of the actual therapy and counseling and stuff like that you would go to for longer term recovery, right? So just keep in mind that these are some things to be mindful of. And so this was an example of how the end objective was to make sure that they're addressing the mental health and the psychological health and also the emotional health of people. And they realized that there were certain things that were lacking, there were certain things that they need to customize and adjust and so on. And they started setting those things up. One thing on this point also is that in the past, or up until recently, maybe in the last like 2 decades, or especially in the last decade, right? There has been more research to establish what we had mentioned in the very beginning of this course, which was these the positive psychology model, or the strengths based model, right? And that was that instead of looking at that people are sort of going behind the baseline, now we're talking about that everyone starts at the baseline, and some of the people focus that some of their skills, right, from the baseline increase through experience, education, training, or whatever else, right? So they increase, and some other ones may not have been addressed. So the issues that they're having in life, or the crises that they might be going through, may be connected to some of those skills not having progressed much, or enough, or as needed, from the baseline. So they haven't gone up, but everyone is pretty much at the baseline. So this is a reframing, restructuring, and they started realizing that the evidence in the researches and stuff, right, they started to indicate that this was actually the realistic model, and the one where they were focused on people sort of like going behind the baseline, regressing and so on, was not in itself sufficient or covering everything. So this positive psychology model started to account for a lot of the things that the other model was not currently addressing. So or that it was not addressing. So the people that are actually being trained now and stuff, you're going to find a lot of those people sort of using these kinds of mindsets. So there's a lot more focus on mental well-being, for example. There's wellness coaching. There's like these kinds of coaches and stuff that are coming up that are helping you also manage different situations and contexts and stuff. So some of the things that I started realizing also in some of my coaches and stuff, was that they were focusing on these kinds of things a lot more, and you're going to see a lot of this happening in the next few years and stuff, inshallah. So keep that in mind. There is definitely a learning curve for the entire world in terms of how to navigate human experiences and human states of being and stuff, right? And it's okay, because obviously we don't know like what goes on in the mind that much, right? We have a lot of information about how things work generally, but we're still figuring there's a lot more, and a lot more. By that I mean like relative to what we know, there's much more that is not known yet in terms of the the intricacies that are involved with the mind, the emotion, and interactions with people and behaviors and so on. So these things are still evolving and updating and stuff. So you're going to see that there's a lot of updates that are going to probably continue happening, but just keep in mind that this is an example. What I'm giving over here is an example of these 3 steps, right? Whether they're applied effectively or not, but I was just giving you examples of them, so you guys can get an idea of how to move forward relative to these concepts, at least. And then you can also apply some of these understandings of, like assessment tools and so on, when it comes to looking at other topics in your own lives and stuff like that. So with that, if you have anything that you guys can discuss that with me. If you have any questions or comments or suggestions or feedback, then you can let me know, or you can email the message, inshallah, or the youth. I think it's youth@icmnc.org. I believe that's the right email. And you can connect with them, inshallah, or you can reach out to me directly, whatever you like. But the main goal with this was to make sure that you're constantly evaluating and assessing yourself relative to the end goals that you have. And if you don't have end goals, to start coming up with those as soon as possible, inshallah, because then you can organize yourself a little bit. You can remove some of the uncertainties that you might otherwise have that don't need to be there, right? There are definitely going to be uncertainties that you don't have control over, but there are certain things that you can control, and you can sort of go according to those, inshallah. So optimize that, continue evaluating yourself, be honest with yourself, where you stand currently, be very clear in where you want to go to, and then inshallah, moving forward now, we're going to focus on how to get there, how to go from where we are to where we need to go to. With that, subhanakallah wa bihamdika, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Jazakumullahu khairan.